Garten of Banban 2 just recently released, and I decided to play both games back to back. And while they are not the worst games ever created, there are some issues that deserve to be discussed. Now, this is not going to be one of those videos that talks about how Garten of Banban has ruined the Mascot horror genre, because if we're being honest, that's simply false. A few lackluster indie games cannot destroy a genre with such a dedicated and old fan base. And please keep in mind that my opinions are my own, and I'm not attacking anybody who may love this game. Now, first and foremost, I have to say that Garten of Banban 2 is much better than Part 1. I think most people can agree that Part 1 was a bit of a joke and definitely was right to be free. The scariest part of Part 1 was basically when Ophelia was coming over in like a conveyor belt and she looks at you with those empty eyes. But even right after that, when she's chasing you, she like makes this rag doll fall off the ledge, so it kind of takes away all that anxiety that you did have. Gotta hit this. Did she fall off? Yeah. Stupid bird. Now, part 2, on the other hand, has some genuinely creepy moments, such as when Celine is slowly making her way to you in that awesome looking hallway, or when the green giant comes to life when he's stuck in that room. And while this next part wasn't scary, I will admit that I love the scene with Ophelia's babies because they're simply super cute. Or at least initially I loved that scene, and this is where I get to my first issue with this game. It felt that many sections of this game were simply meant to waste time, or I guess to be more specific, to pad the playtime of the game. Ophelia's babies are a good example of this. It takes quite a bit of time to catch these chicks and get them back to the little pool, and the lights turning off don't really serve a purpose outside of just making it harder for you to see these babies and to catch them, which again I believe goes back to just padding the time, right? How can I make these players run around for longer? The second issue here is that you really have no warning that Ophelia is behind the door. After I caught all the babies the first time, I ran back to open the door thinking I was done, only to run right into Ophelia and die. And what makes matters even worse is that I had to catch the babies all over again once I died. Now, the second time I went through this sequence, I thought that maybe I had to lead Ophelia back to her babies, which was another huge mistake and gave me another death. And in all honesty, it would have been nice if the task here was a bit more clear, because later on you figure out that if you just move to the side, Ophelia will go to her babies herself. Where's she at? Go to your children. Go to your babies. Go to your babies. Okay, so she's going to her kids. That's great. But this whole section just kind of left me wondering, like, what was the point of doing this? Which I don't think any developer is really looking to make people feel like, because that's not a good look. Another area that gave me quite a bit of problems is when you make it to Bambalina's class section. Now, I will admit that this was actually kind of funny at first, but it loses its charm really fast, considering that it isn't immediately clear what you need to do. And of course, if you fail at any point, you have to start that section all over again. And the reason that this kind of annoyed me is because for part of these questions, maybe 2 out of 3, you're basically just guessing which tape recorder you need to actually push. And I don't feel like that's a good mechanic, especially because it punishes you with making you restart the whole thing over again. And the worst part about this is that you have to listen to her full dialogue again, which, as I said, at first was kind of funny, but after hearing it for the second, third time, it just gets kind of annoying. And again, it goes back to adding this feel that the developers are just trying to get you to waste more time in the game. But sadly enough, this isn't even the worst example of this. The worst would have to be that if your settings are not set just right, some parts of this game are pretty much impossible. In the room with the blue and pink arrows, I thought the room was just super dark, but it turns out that if your lighting settings are set anything below high, you simply can't see basic parts of puzzles. In this room specifically, there are literally 3 buttons that you need to hit with your drone. One of them is covered behind this yellow glass, which is an issue I'll get into later, but I had no idea that there was a third one because it was basically just covered in darkness. I actually had to go look at another creator and see what she did, and then I figured out that she had the same issue, turned up her lighting, and then we could actually see the puzzle. So basically, for people who don't have computers that can handle a certain level of graphics, you are simply out of luck. But what's even worse about this is, even if you have a pretty good rig like I do, you still can't really run this game above medium because it makes the game just look so bad and run so poorly. So I think that the real issue here may just be that the game isn't properly optimized. Now back to this issue about the drone and the yellow glass. This is an issue that pops up in the game several times, and it's supposed to be a puzzle, but it isn't really exciting, fun, or even challenging for the most part. And I know I keep saying this, but I feel like this is another example of the devs trying to get people just to waste time because it simply doesn't make sense to have this glass there and it doesn't add anything to the actual gameplay. Probably the worst example of this is in the XX room, where basically there's 3 X's and you have to send your drone in this little pattern in order to break this glass from the opposite side. And this wouldn't be as big of a deal if the drone wasn't so clunky and if the puzzles actually worked as intended. I feel like with some of these puzzles, if you do everything correctly, you actually get punished for it and your drone doesn't go where it's supposed to go. So you need to always be a little bit off or hitting something just at the right corner in order to get your drone to go where you want it to go. And the big problem with this is that's not how the developers intended it to be. It's just the way that it ended up in the game. Another thing that kind of irritated me about this as well is that when you look at the drone's workbenches, there's literally a hammer right there. Why would you put hammers in a game if your character can't just pick it up and break this glass and keep moving forward? In the first game, we literally used a hammer to pull the planks off the wall so that we can get into that little conveyor room. So why couldn't we use the planks here to just break some glass, which would be a very simple thing to do? The yellow glass just made the drones feel a bit tedious. And now, with that being said, I don't actually hate the idea of the drones. I just wish they had more uses in game. I feel like for like a third of this game, the drone is pretty much unusable or just useless. But one of the best uses that I did see for the drone in this game, and what I'm hoping that they add more of in like game 3, is when you get to ram the actual drone into the green giant's eye. If I'm being honest, it did take me way too long to figure that puzzle out, but it was one of the better puzzles in the game, and it actually added some variety into what you can do with your drone. I just wish there would have been some type of indication that that's what you needed to do. And also, I don't think I'm the only person that did this, but once I rammed the actual drone into the giant's eye, I tried to walk past him and open the door that was next to him, only to be grabbed up. It wasn't quite clear to me that you couldn't just walk past him once he was like trying to rub his eye. So then I died, had to go back, open all the doors again, take all the blood samples again, and then go get his blood sample, which again was very tedious. I feel like they could have just started me back at the giant, but instead they make you do everything again. Now, while I did like the scene with Celine, it was not without its problems as well. While I did think it was cool that you couldn't move until she was pretty much in your face, I didn't like that she could get you even if you made it into the room. I feel like once you were inside that door, the door should have shut behind you and it should have been done with. Instead, you have to make it into the door while she is still basically finishing up her dialogue. And this took me about 4 tries to figure out. And it wasn't that it was hard, it was just that the rules of this particular engagement were so unclear that I just had to do a bunch of trial and error to figure out the best way to get around her. And I have no problem for that in games like Elden Ring or like Dark Souls games where there's ways that you can get around bosses and try different strategies, but this isn't a game like that. I just feel like because it was poorly optimized that some of these things just kind of get in the way instead of it being truly challenging. Now, with that being said, the room with the cannons was actually the best puzzle in the game overall. There wasn't any cheese here and the puzzle was very clear and it was a proper level of like difficult. If more of the puzzles in the game were like this, I would have enjoyed this game much more. I hope they add more things like this in part 3 because this is clear, this is challenging, and it was actually kind of fun to do. Now, with that being said, the floating platforms was one of the worst things that I actually played through in this game. Not because it was bad, but because the lag in this game was just so horrible at times that it wasn't really about skill. I just basically had to hope that my game didn't hitch before I was making a jump. And to make matters worse, there's also a tape in this room, but unless I missed something while playing through the game, I didn't find another actual area that I could play the tape in. So it just felt like a waste of time and I didn't actually get to see it. But in actuality, maybe I didn't miss too much because the first tape that you find just basically shows Banban like laid in a room in a fetal position. So maybe it was nothing. If anybody was able to play the tape, if you can give me a brief description of what it was, I'd appreciate you. Now, the final chase scene was the only chase scene that I actually really liked in this game. The green giant popping out from different places was a nice touch, even though I don't think he could actually grab you. The only thing that I didn't like is that both of the switches at the end looked the same, so I just assumed I had to hit both, but in actuality, I just needed to hit the one on the right and stand in front of the door so Banbalina could get snatched up. But I had no way of knowing this other than just trial and error. And again, I feel like if this game would just make things a bit more clear, it would have been a much more enjoyable ride. Now, I've gone over quite a few things that I didn't like with this game, but there are some things that they did very well. The voice acting, for instance, was actually pretty good, especially the voice acting of Banbalina.
Hey, you didn't see the person they're talking about, did you?
Nah.
Oh, what am I saying? You're one of the cool kids. Of course you don't talk to ugly, unpopular kids like them.
I also really like that you could customize your drone with different hats and whatnot. It's a small thing, but it was a nice addition. I even named my little drone depending on what hat I will put on him. What can we put on our, Let's put the glasses on him. He's no longer Joel. We're gonna call him Einstein. And while I wasn't a fan of all the puzzles, I will say that I enjoyed the fact that there was more variety in the puzzles this time. The first puzzle where you have to find the employee's desk based on the color on the chart was actually pretty good and the right level of challenging in my opinion. And lastly, I love the giant faceless beast that appeared near the end of the game. Visually, he was one of the more awesome things to pop up in this game. And the fact that he watches you as you run around is just a bit of a bonus. To sum this up, Garten of Banban is not a bad game, but they need to make some changes before they drop part 3. They need to make tasks more clear for players and optimize their game so setting doesn't make it impossible to progress. They also need to remove all the dead gameplay sections, aka the parts in the game where it just feels like you're just doing things to pad time. Because if you look on Steam, a lot of people feel this way, and the community is basically saying that the developers are doing this on purpose so that people couldn't refund the game. Because you all know that if you can beat a game in under 2 hours, you basically get your money back. And I don't know if this is true or not. I'm not going to put that on the developers, but it's coming from the community, and I'm definitely sure that that's not what you want for your game. And this last point isn't too big of a deal, but they also need to make it to where you can see what happens to monsters after a chase scene. Too many times that I turn around and the monster was simply gone, right? If I complete the scene, I should be rewarded with seeing how the monster goes down, like how they did in Poppy Playtime. With that being said, this game does have potential though, and I'm curious to see what they actually create in the future. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe today to become a member of the Orseofkorse, and let me know if there's any other games I should cover. Thanks for watching. This is Orseofkorse. We'll see you in another video. Peace, peace.